friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Lawn Fawn's Let's Go Nuts and Winter Birds. So I've stamped those images out on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. So I'm starting with my squirrels, and I'm going to be using 5 shades for them, but 3 of them are for the main part of the body, and then the 2 of them are for like the lighter areas. We'll get to that, but I'm using E11, E13, E15, E17, and E18. Starting with that E18, I'm using that to lay in my shadows down the back of the body and the underside of the arms, the underside of the tail, and then blending that out with the E17. Then I'll bring in the E15, and that is where I'm going to finish off most of the body, but I wanted to have a little bit of lighter area on the face and the belly, so I'm going to save some room on all of that for the E13 next. Also, I did save a little bit of room on the top of the tail. Since it's turned up toward the light, it would be getting a nice little highlight there as well. And then I use the E11 to fill in the belly and the lower part of the face. So this card is actually going to be a monochromatic card, and what that means is that you choose kind of one color and stay in the range of that. So you can go a little bit lighter, a little bit darker, but basically you're going to stay in that color family for the entire card. And these types of cards used to scare me a little bit. I was really nervous to attempt them, but we actually did this challenge for Lawn Fanatics last year, and I created a card using the bats from Lawn Fawn, and it ended up being one of my favorite cards I've ever made. I can pop a little picture on screen right here, and I have a video tutorial on that as well, so you can definitely check that out if you're interested. But when this challenge came up again, I was actually excited to try it out. But I wanted to go in a very different direction, kind of color palette wise, because I wanted to challenge myself again. And I had been feeling squirrels lately. Red squirrels are my favorite animal, as many of you know. And I had just been wanting to create a card with red squirrels. So I decided to go with rust. I thought that would be a really nice, very fall color palette to go with kind of this brownish orange tone that kind of lets me lean on either side of the spectrum for that, going a little bit more into the orange realm and then also a little bit more into the brown realm. And then that's how this whole card idea came together. So I was excited to try this out again and see how it would turn out. So let me know down in the comments if you have ever attempted a monochromatic card. So I am going to move on now and go more towards the orange side of things. I'm going to darken up this orange combo by adding in E19. So this is the last color in the family of what I used for the red squirrels. I used the E18 as my darkest for them. For the leaves, I'm starting with the E19, and then I'm going to add to that YR14 and YR18. So I'm going to place that darkest shade, the E19, at the base of each leaf, and then I'll blend that out with the YR18 as my midtone. And then I'll use the YR14 at the very edges of the leaf. So it runs the whole range of having that brownish rust tone at one end and then more of an orangish tone at the other end. But it's still very much in that rust color family and still looks very cohesive. So I think it works great for a monochromatic card. I think it's important when you do these kinds of cards to have those different values and kind of run a little bit of a spectrum in that range. You still want it to all look like it is that color palette, but to me, if it was all exactly the same tone, if I had just used the same 3 or 4 or 5 markers for everything, it would just get a bit boring to the eye to me. So I'm moving on to my branches, and these I brought in from the Winter Birds because I really like the texture of these. So I'm going to use E55, E57, and E59 for these. So now I'm running more into the brown tones of like the E18 that I used for the shadows of my squirrels. So now I'm going to like the opposite end of the spectrum in that rust category. So the leaves went more toward the orange end of what would be considered rust, and now I'm going more towards the dark brown end. And again, I'm working toward the light source being the sun overhead, so I put the E59 down at the underside of the branches, blended up with the E57, and then I'm filling in with the E55 for the highlight. Then I wanted to switch things up for the acorns because I really didn't want everything to look exactly the same like I mentioned. I'm going to use 5 shades for my acorns, which does seem like a lot, but I'm only using some of them for the caps and some of them for the actual nut. So I pulled out E21, E23, E25, E27, and E29. And these E20s kind of fall in the mid-range between the E50s that I just used for the tree branches and the E-teens that I used for the squirrels. So for the caps, I started with the darkest, the E29, blended that out with the E27, and then added a little E25 on the edge. And I'm just filling those all in and kind of picking which direction to put the shadow based on how they're laying, either in the pile or how they'll be in the scene. And then for the actual nut, I'm just using 2 shades. So I started with the E23 and I put my shadow on the same side as the dark part of the cap, or at least I tried to, and then blended that out with the E21. So that they would be just a little bit lighter, but again, still in that same color family. So I'm just finishing up these acorns, and then I wanted to add some rosy cheeks to my squirrels and also color inside the mouth of the one that has his mouth open. So I pulled out R12, which is more orange leading for the pinks than I would normally use, but I wanted to keep in that color family. It wasn't quite dark enough, so I brought in R14 and just went over that, and then I trimmed these images out with their matching dyes. For the background, I'm starting with a piece of Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock, and I'm going to blend on some Distress Oxide Ink, and I'm starting with some Crackling Campfire. And I'm going to place that ink in the top left corner and kind of bring it down in a triangular formation, covering about half the card. And the idea is that it's going to look like there is a tree above that has kind of, changed colors for fall. And I'm going to make it look in that same rust family by adding in some vintage photo right over top of that. So I'm blending that in from that top corner, bringing that down to cover about half of that Crackling Campfire that I've already laid in. And then I'll go back to the first ink blending tool and continue to lay in that color back and forth until I have a look that I like. Once I'm happy with it, I want to add some texture, especially since I want it to look like some leaves in the background. It's going to be more of like the suggestion of that, but I'm going to splatter some plain water all over that background, let it react to that Distress Oxide ink, and then I'll blot that up with a paper towel. And there you can see how that lifts all the color. I'm going to add a little bit more just to give it some extra texture and lift that up once again. And then, of course, I'm going to splatter some of both of these inks. So I'll do the Crackling Campfire first, mix some water into that, and then splatter that all over. And I'm going to let that kind of go into the rest of the white space to almost look like falling leaves in the background. And then I'll do the same with the vintage photo, just adding some water and mixing that up and then splattering right over top. And you can see that really gives that whole spectrum of the rust color that I wanted to use and is really going to tie in with the Copic coloring. I also did want to add a bit of gold shimmer, so I went with this more coppery shade, and I'm just mixing that up with some water, and then I'll splatter that all over the background as well, just to give it some extra interest. And I think this kind of coppery shade goes well with the rust and doesn't stand out too much as a distraction, kind of ties into the brown color palette. I'll set that aside to dry, and in the meantime I'm going to work on my sentiment. So I've got a piece of Lawn Fawn ground coffee cardstock, and I'm treating that with the Rabbit Hole Designs powder tool. And then I'm going to stamp my sentiment in 2 lines using some Versamark ink, which is just a clear sticky ink that works great for embossing because it kind of grabs a hold of the powder. And I'm inking that up twice and pushing down very lightly so that those letters don't get squished and maintain their shape so that they're very legible. And then I'm going to coat that in some Lawn Fawn white embossing powder and make sure that every letter is coated, and then tap off any excess from the back. And then I'll heat my heat gun off to the side for about 30 seconds to a minute usually. I think I went on the shorter side for this one because it took a little bit longer to melt the powder than it usually does. So I probably should have let it heat up just a little bit longer. But I like to bring that tool to the back of the cardstock first and then to the front just to kind of minimize any warping, and heat that powder up until it's white and shiny and all melted. And then I'm going to do an insert for the inside of my card since I'm using a dark colored cardstock. I trimmed down another piece of white cardstock with the outside in stitch rectangle stackables, and I'm actually using a sentiment from Pool Party for this one, and it just says "Have a happy day." And then the 2 leaves and the other squirrel are both from Let's Go Nuts, and I stamped that down in pumpkin spice ink. So once that background panel was dry, I trimmed that down with the same die that I used for the inner panel, the outside in stitch rectangle stackables. And now I'm ready to start assembling. I've added some foam tape to the back of all of my images, and I'm trying to figure out the layout before I attach anything. So I've left those release papers on the back of the foam tape until I have things spaced how I want them, because with the sentiment I need to have things kind of planned out a little bit to make sure that I have room for everything. So once I've figured out where those tree branches are going to go, I can go ahead and peel off those release papers. And I'm using my Twiddler's Nook embellishment tray as like a little mini garbage can on my desk, just to have a place to put all those papers since there's a whole bunch of them. And then I can just take that to the garbage can and dump it out when I'm done. I did not add foam tape behind the Yay Squirrel's tail because I wanted to slip in the pile of nuts. And when I did, I noticed that I did need to move him forward a little bit just to have room for those so they weren't hanging off the edge of the card. So I just adjusted him quickly. And then I'm going to bring in those sentiment strips so I can get the placement of that last branch correctly. So I'm splitting up the sentiment. I'm going to put "It's Your Birthday" right under the second branch, but on the left-hand side. And then the "Let's Go Nuts" is going to go under the last branch, but on the right-hand side. And once I have those placed and made sure that they're on there straight, then I can attach that third and last branch over on the bottom left. And normally I adhere my background to my card base before I add my images, but I wanted to let the branches kind of hang off the edge of this panel onto the card base. So that's why I went ahead and assembled the card front first, and then I'll attach it later on. So once I have all my squirrels placed, I'm going to start to add in the little acorns and leaves. I wanted some of them to be hanging from the tree branches that are kind of extended down. And I also wanted one of the little acorns to go right above the word nuts, just to tie into that sentiment and also to look like it's kind of fallen down there. And the idea is that the squirrel on the top branch is kind of tossing down the acorns to the squirrel on the second branch, which is why he's got his hands up in the air to catch them. And he's also got the pile of acorns behind him where he's been stashing them. And then the third little guy is kind of sleeping on the job. He got a little bit tired. So anyway, I'm just going to go in now and fill in the leaves. I stamped a whole bunch of these because I really wanted to have those nice pops of orange to really drive home the idea of it being a fall card. So I'm just placing them here and there. I decided to put another of the leaves on top of the word birthday, just to also kind of have that whole trickle down effect of the leaves and the nuts kind of going from one level to the next and falling down, and then I'm just kind of adjusting and deciding where to put one leaf and where to put two leaves. And I've got one left, so that one is going to go kind of floating down toward that acorn, and I just adjusted that another time. And now I can adhere this focal panel and the insert to my card base, which is again the ground coffee cardstock, which I folded and scored to a A2 standard size card. It is 4 1/4 wide by 5 1/2 tall. So I will glue that insert on the inside, and then I can take that focal panel and glue that to the outside using my Barely Art Precision Craft Glue. Just making sure that it is centered on there nicely so that there is an equal amount of that brown cardstock showing through, which I think really ties in nicely in the color palette. And then I'll just trim off any remaining ends of those tree branches with my Cutter Bee Teflon coated scissors. And then I just wanted to add a little bit of extra sparkle, so I'm taking my Platinum Stickles, which I have really been loving this fall, and adding a little bit to each of the leaves, not too much because it does cover up the coloring, but I just really like the color of the sparkle. I think it looks so great for fall. And that is going to finish this one off, so I will lift that up so you can see all of that shimmer as it catches the light and give you another peek at the inside. I really like how this one turned out, and I hope you guys enjoyed it too. If you did, please be sure to hit that thumbs up button to let me know, or you can leave me a comment down below. I love chatting with you guys down there. Make sure that you subscribe if you want to be alerted whenever I post a new video, which is every Monday and Friday. And all of the products I use will also be listed and linked for you in the description bar below, so be sure to check that out if you'd like to pick up anything for yourself. I've also included 2 extra videos if you'd like to keep watching, and thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you soon in another video. Bye-bye.